You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor, Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Vince Passaro on the show with me. He has an amazing new book. It's called Crazy Sorrow, and this book is such a journey. When you crack open and you fall into the story with these characters and realize that you are in, you're in for such a treat. It's one of those books that you don't want to end. You want to keep following these characters for as long as you can. The book is available everywhere today. When you're hearing this, it's book release day, and we'll put links in the show notes and also go visit your local bookstores and help them out as well. Crazy Sorrow, available everywhere today. Welcome to the show, Vince.
Thank you so much, Hank. I'm really pleased and privileged to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Vince, we begin each show with the same question. And that question...
And I have thought about that question.
Well, that's fantastic. What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, it's an interesting question for me because, or an intricate answer to that question. I did not have books read to me as a child. My mother was a big reader, and I think her experience was you get old enough to read, you learn to read, and then you go find books, you know. I don't think she was read to as a child, and I wasn't read to as a child. The only book I remember being read to me was the Walt Disney, highly graphic version of Pinocchio. So I guess my first experience where I was tremendously excited, not just about what I was reading, like the Hardy Boys, which I read in huge quantities, but where I was excited by the existence of the writer of the book, was, I guess I was maybe 11 or 12, and I read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. And there's this... it was the first book I ever read, and there's only been a couple where I finished the book and then just started up again at the front because I couldn't bear to leave it. But when Tom Sawyer ends, there's this remarkable sort of afterword, this next page, in which Twain speaks directly to you after being the hand behind what you've been reading, and says, well, this is a story of a boy. It's hard to know when to stop the story of a boy. If it was a story of a man, you'd stop at marriage. But it's a boy, so we're going to stop here, and that's, and even though I'm not quite sure it's the right place. And this idea of the author being there and making this decision and telling me about it was very exciting for me. It introduced the idea of authorship. The next thing that happened was I was in ninth grade, and I remember we were assigned to write a story, and it was due Monday, and Sunday afternoon came along, and we had company over. My cousins were there, and my aunt and uncle, and I said, I have to write a story for tomorrow. And I went into my room, and my mother had just given me an Olivetti electric typewriter, and I sat down and I just wrote the story right at the typewriter, which is how I've worked ever since. And it was a page-and-a-half story about a bunch of people on a cable car or tram car crossing a mountain gorge. In other words, high off the ground. And suddenly the car grinds to a halt, stops very suddenly, actually. There's no grinding, it just stops. And everyone wonders what's going on. And this more heroic fellow among them pushes open the trapdoor on the ceiling and lifts himself up, and he can see that the cable is burning the whole apparatus which is attached to the cable, there are blue flames and sparks. And he drops back down and he says, "I don't see anything wrong. I don't know what's the matter." And then they all plunged to their death. It was great. Page and a half. I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed the sense of suddenly occupying this world, this reality that was entirely inside my head, but nevertheless organized by and driven by the presence of these other people who were the characters in the story. So those two things, but I still thought I was going to be a lawyer and a politician and ultimately run for Congress and Senate. I was a big history and politics buff in high school, and then in 12th grade we got to AP English, and in my town, which was on Long Island, the North Shore of Long Island, Great Neck, there was an independent, serious bookstore opened up about maybe my junior year, and it was only around for 5 or 6 years, but just at the right time for me to discover books in that way. And I went there one day, and I was very interested in poetry, and I bought 4 books of poetry. A book of poetry by Leonard Nimoy, who was Dr. Spock.
Sure.
A book of poetry by Richard Thomas, who played John Boy, who wanted to be a writer. And that was influential, too. I think about it, on the Waltons. I loved the Waltons. I don't know if you or anybody listening to this remember the Waltons. And then I'd heard these other 2 poets via Bob Dylan's song, Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. And I bought the selected poetry of Ezra Pound and the selected poems of T.S. Eliot. And one was in New Directions, that was Pound, and one was Harcourt Brace, that was Eliot. And I took them home, and I started reading them, and it became very clear to me that while I didn't get what was going on in Eliot and Pound, they were clearly writers of an entirely different order from Richard Thomas and Leonard Nimoy. And it was a very big discovery, and that was the team I wanted to play for, the big leagues. So that had a big effect on me, too. So by 12th grade, in freshman year, I was writing poetry. All novelists, no, not all. Back in the day, most novelists started as bad poets, and that's what I was.
Well, I think that that stands true today. There's still a lot of bad poets out there trying to find where they, trying to find their literary legs, if you will.
Yes, I think I don't know why that's where we start. I mean, poetry is not all that accessible and to young people, but it's funny. It's where many of us start.
It's so funny because poetry does have this way of luring you in because it feels like, and maybe because it's really well done, poetry hits you on an emotional level, and it connects deeply with people. Therefore, if you connect deeply with something, it must be easy to just reach down deep inside yourself and pull that out. And what everyone learns very quickly is it's not as easy as it looks. And when it does connect deeply with you, you realize that that's the hardest of things. And I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Well, yeah, I think that's all very true. I think it needs to go directly to an emotional. I mean, it can have a narrative. It can be. I watched her open the blinds and think about her day to come, but at the same time, it has to get very quickly to a deep emotional level. And the other requirement it has that prose does not have on a line-by-line basis is it has to be beautiful. And or it ought to be beautiful, or it strives to be beautiful, in addition to doing its telling. It's actually a manipulation of the language, and you can see this visually on a page. The language is arranged for maximum sort of effect on your ear and on your eye, as well as on your spirit. Frank Kermode, who was a great critic of the middle century, wrote a great essay that was in Harper's Magazine probably 35 years ago or more. But it was how all of literature starts with sound. Our interest is sound. Before meaning comes sound, and I think poetry lives up to that obligation in a way that prose and dramatic writing don't or can't really.
Right.
But there are some people who write prose at that level, but not many.
So Vince, from that that experience in your senior year of high school, where one moment you wanted to go into politics and study law, and then finding these books of poetry that then change your life and change your trajectory. You have gone on to write for a number of great publications: Harper's Magazine, The Nation, New York Times Sunday Magazine, New York Times Book Review, and on and on and on. I could read, all day from your list of credits.
I
But
used to
how?
spend all day writing for those places. I had 3 kids. I needed the money. Back then,
Right,
there was money to be made in writing for magazines.
right. Well,
But I did, yes, I wrote a lot of stuff.
just as a side note, since you brought it up, how has the industry changed in that sense, where you used to could
Oh,
publish essays and things like that for magazines? There was always a market for short story writers or essayists or whatever. I'm assuming that whole landscape has changed this last decade or so.
or more. It started shrinking even as I got into it. I went to graduate school and I got out in 1988, and I started writing for a living by the end of that year, which was quite fortunate. And I was writing for. I was making, I think, $450 for a book review in a weekly. It started up in New York called 7 Days, and you couldn't get 450. That's 450 $1988. You couldn't get 300 $2021 to write a book review now anywhere, except for the New York Times, that is to say, and the New Yorker. But those aren't reviews; those are real essays. Um, it's the money disappeared, and it was starting to shrink. I signed contracts with a number of publications, and they all went out of business. It was like the kiss of death. Let's hire Vince for to write a piece a month for a year, and then they go out of business. And that's starting in the early '90s, because the magazines. It's a very complicated situation. Not just the internet; it precedes the internet, and it has to do with the corporatization of the publishing business, both at the magazine level and the book level, and at the same time, constantly looking to the market to tell you what you ought to publish, which in the market's version that they were studying so carefully, the magazines in the 90s, it was publish less and less words, fewer, more pictures, more, so they were letting their marketing teams sort of change the industry long before the internet came and brutalized them. But the fact is, there was some incident a few years ago where a really seasoned guy, newspaper magazine writer, got solicited to do something for one of the publications that started an online thing, and but was already an existing print publication. And he said, "Sure, what do you pay?" And she was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we can't pay anybody for anything." And he's like, I don't work for free, you know? And
Right.
somehow this went viral and was, on all the social media. I mean, he was really angry about it. And and I'm like that, if you write for a living, you write for a living, I mean, what I do out of necessity is make art, which is, fiction, occasionally essays that attain, that strive for that level. But uh, anything that can, be published in a magazine, I'm doing that for pay,
Sure.
So it's that money has disappeared. I mean, the money came from advertising essentially, and advertising has um, it no longer supports that work. So the Times has a very good online existence. The New Yorker does, but I mean, the number of places that can actually pay you are very, very few and hard to break into.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website. Developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates, PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting, and we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. What Death Taught Terrence by Derek McFadden. Life is a journey. So is the afterlife. At the end of his life, Terrence McDonald must discover its meaning, or he'll be banned from the afterlife forever, and his soul will cease to exist. Join Terrence and those who love him on a poignant and unforgettable journey through a life at once wonderful and harrowing. Learn what Terrence learned. See what Terrence sees. By this provocative story's end, readers may even learn a thing or two about themselves. See why people are saying things like, Derek McFadden writes with an insight few can match. If you like the works of Mitch Albom, I think you'll find What Death Taught Terrence a worthy addition to your library, and the reading of it a life-affirming journey. I found the story immediately immersive, and it stuck with me long after I finished. What Death Taught Terrence by Derek McFadden, on sale now.
Well, Ray Bradbury famously gave the advice to new writers that you should write a new short story every week. And, kind of tongue-in-cheek said, because who can write 52 bad short stories in a row, over the course of a year? And while great advice...
It's sort of like the ladies' man approach to
right.
finding women in bars.
Right.
Yeah, you hit enough of them, and finally somebody's going to respond.
Exactly. But during in the time that he wrote that, there was a market to publish short stories, and part of of that strategy was to have something publishable. Well, there's not a great market to publish short stories anymore. There are a few markets, and there are people that are publishing anthologies and things like that that are looking for submissions. But
Not many.
now, yeah, not many. But now, if a writer wants to break in, the novel is the vehicle. Um,
The agents now, there are many agents who have told their writers, we will not have anything to do with your short stories. I mean,
yeah,
in other words, we're not going to sell them. We're not going to pitch them to magazines. They don't want to know from short stories because the publishing business doesn't want to know from short stories. And yet, every year, there are 3 or 4 very successful books of short stories.
right.
So, why this prejudice? I don't know. But I've been trying to publish a book of short stories for 20 years, and each time I got, you have to do a novel first, and of course, it took me a hell of a long time between my first novel and my second novel, some of which I wasn't writing fiction at all for some of those years, but I mean, it still took a long time. So, eventually I'm going to have 35 years worth of stories that I'm going to want to publish, and they don't want to know about it now even more than they didn't want to know about it then. So it's going to be hard. Short stories,
Crazy.
are I don't know. Uh, there are a number of very good literary journals, um, but their circulations are so very small. They're often receiving more stories from they're receiving more submissions from writers than they have readers, um, and now they all use an automated submission system, so you don't know where it's going or who's going to look at it or anything. It used to be if you knew who the editor was, you could send it to the editor, and it might get screened by an intern, or it might not. But you felt like you were at least trying to
Right.
reach the right person. Now you don't really have that shot. Um, so it's a rough deal. And I think people go to MFA programs. I did, but I mean in 1986. But I think people go now just to have somebody can read and respond to their work. I mean, it's like because there's nobody out there otherwise.
Right. Right. Well, your new novel that's out everywhere today that we're talking about is called Crazy Sorrow, and this book is I alluded to it in the beginning is a grand journey. That's the only way I can describe it. That of these characters um and this window into these lives, and I'm I'm fascinated, Vince, with how stories begin. There's a certain magic that no one has ever been able to fully um, comprehend exactly what happens. In one moment, nothing about Crazy Sorrow exists anywhere in the world, and then either one of the characters walks onto the stage of your mind, and you start thinking, well, what is she up to, and how where is she going, and then George walks in and meets Anna, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then in some form Crazy Sorrow does exist, and then you as the writer start excavating the story and figuring out who these characters are. What is that first moment of inspiration like for you?
Hmm. I mean, I think it's very different. Um, uh, Sometimes a line comes into my head. First of all, I've written 2 novels, and they're radically different experiences in doing so. Um, this novel started because I wanted to write about New York in the 70s, and I wanted particularly, I had gone to college at Columbia in the 70s, and I wanted to write about that scene in that world. And somehow I was inspired to, um, well, actually, no, there was another first scene which never made it into the book, in which there in the dorm room. But soon after, there came to me the idea of being at the celebration of the Bicentennial in July 4th, 1976, which I was at, down on a landfill that became Battery Park City in New York many years later. And the landfill was just like a big sandy stretch out into the Hudson River. And it was later, there are wonderful, if you look it up, there are wonderful pieces in the Times and elsewhere about this beach that people are occupying down there. And there was, for 2 years, art exhibitions there called Art on the Beach, and people did performance and conceptual art and piles of junk as art and all kinds of art. But that night, it was where 1 million people went to watch these fireworks that were supposed to be the greatest fireworks of all time, because every year they're supposed to be the greatest fireworks of all time. But right. These were technologically somehow advanced. And there were 110 sailing ships in the harbor with their masts all bare, because they had sailed up the Hudson that day and were now at anchor in the harbor. And there were the fireworks, and looming behind us, the two towers, black at night they were, and somehow that was the scene. And I think I always knew I wanted to write a novel in which New York was one of the characters, and I think that's what I've done here. I mean, it takes place over 40 years. It goes from 76 to 2016. And as you say, there are these two main characters, George and Anna. And when it started, George, I knew that he was going to meet a girl that night, as I was working it out and starting writing it. But I had written a short story about Anna that is now a chapter of the book. And I suddenly realized she's the girl, although the short story was later in her life, a few years later. So that's how, it's a kind of sedimentary process or an evolution, or it's either the way water wears away stone or the way stone accumulates in water, but it's something gradual that happens when you're working on a novel, where it accrues meaning and the characters begin to emerge, their identities begin to emerge. And I'm a very big believer that you can't decide what they're going to do. They have to decide what they're going to do. I'm a big advocate of free will in life and in art. Michelangelo has these marvelous sequence of sculptures called The Prisoners, which you can see in the Accademia in Florence, where they have the David. But in the corridor leading up are these astonishing statues of these twisted figures emerging from the stone. And it was Michelangelo's demonstration that he believed the figure resided in the stone. You discover the figure in the stone. You're not just carving away the stone to make the figure you have in mind. And I think for me, that has always been a very instructive idea for fiction, that the character is discovered and emerges, and has movement and will they have movement and will on their own, and so that's what happens, So I had the night of the Bicentennial, and I had the fireworks, and I had the towers, which come in and out of the book a number of times and are featured on the cover, and are, the book's being released on the 20th, in tandem with the 20th anniversary of their fall. So, that's what I had to work with. And then there are a lot of there were two other characters who had main narrative lines that I've had to, they're still in the story, but they're only there as incidental friends and acquaintances. They don't have their own sections now the way they did. So there's like 200 pages that didn't even make it in there, but it's nevertheless a 400-page book. So, then it was just a matter of and I never knew where the hell I was going. I didn't know where it was going to end. I didn't know anything. So it's like, those prisoners carving their way out of, prison with, stolen spoons.
You
Tunneling out.
right. You alluded to the fact that you wanted to make New York a character in the book, and
Mm-hmm.
and I was going to say earlier there are actually three main characters in the book. There's George, Anna, and New York. And New York
Thank you.
it is absolutely prominent in the book, and um, I I wondered if the book coming out when it does, if there was a connection in your mind to the anniversary of the Twin Towers falling. And when we're recording this, we're a couple of days before the anniversary,
Mm-hmm.
and this show is going to come out a couple of days after. Um, but when you're writing this, and you're thinking of New York in the 70s, and you're thinking of that scene and the fireworks and the towers, which are black, at night in the background, and now looking at what is now um, the World Trade Center area, and those towers are now gone, and they've been replaced with a single tower, and the whole landscape has changed. How did that change of landscape seep into the story and affect the characters?
Oh, I think the change seeped into me, and I would have been happy to publish it on the 13th anniversary of the fall of the towers. I didn't have any requirement in my mind to take so long. I had it in the book first in 2018, and the editor I had at the time said, "There's too many characters. There's too much stuff going on. You got to trim it back to just George and Anna, and come back and see me in a year." And he had moved on by that time, so there was yet another editor I handed it to who took a while to read it, and then he said, "Okay, we're going to try and publish this in September of next year." It was 2020. September next year to coincide with the 20th anniversary, and I was very surprised because I had become a more obscure literary personage than I had been when I published my first book 18 years ago, and so getting a September publishing date, you cover the business, September is the big month.
Sure.
And I was shocked. I expected to be moved to, February 2nd, Groundhog's Day. And suddenly it's a September pub date, and I was thrilled. But so it was the anniversary was not in my mind. The towers have been in my mind. I was in New York on September 11th, and I was downtown at 23rd Street when the second tower fell, and I was watching it, and it was an event that has never faded, become less vivid. It has never been resolved. It's huge. And it's funny, I was just talking to a bartender the other day. I stopped in and had a drink and an appetizer before an appointment, and turned out he was over in Jersey taking pictures for a Jersey paper, and his editor said, "We're a local paper. We're not. This is an international story record." And he never got the film back, and he never saw it. And he got choked up talking about that day.
Wow.
And here it was nearly 20 years later. So it never fades. It just never fades if you were here and it was your city at the time. So I knew they were there. I knew that was, one of the stones on which, this was going to be hung. But I didn't know, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew, I just kept going forward in time with these characters and their lives. and finally I was done. Or I
Vince,
decided I was done.
when someone is reading Crazy Sorrow and they get to the end and they close that back cover, what do you hope they're left with? What part or what about Crazy Sorrow or about Anna, George, their stories, their lives? What do you think? What do you hope people are left with, and what part of these characters of this story do you hope that they carry forward with them?
I know from experience writing the first novel that the things that stand out to people and that is vivid for them and they remember is all radically different. I'm always surprised, like, wow, I don't remember that. Like I'll never forget the moment when so and so did so and so in your book, and I'm like, really? I forgot it. So I don't have a particular sense. I think there's one very dramatic thing that happens in the book, and that is, of course, on September 11th, 2001. But other than that, I don't have a sense that there's any one thing or two things or three things I want people to hold on to. By the time I finished the book and had worked on it with the editor and been tortured by the publishing process, but as I came to know the book in that settled way, that it's not how you know it when you're writing it and even when you're finishing it, my hope for it was that someone would find it beautiful.
Crazy Sorrow is available everywhere now. When you're hearing this, there's going to be links to it in the show notes where you can grab it on Amazon or Audible, or go visit your local bookstore and grab the hardcover for yourself. And this is a book that you'll want, on your shelf for years to come, and to share it with people. This is a story that will become part of you. I just know it will. Vince, what do you think about the audiobook? Have you heard any
I will
pre-release?
I will be given the audio files on the release date, I'm told. But I heard from the actor who read it. He wrote to me, which was very nice, and wrote to tell me that he thought the book was, in fact, beautiful.
Wow.
So that was nice. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And he was, he was very enthusiastic about it, and he wants to tell all of his friends about it and everything. And this guy reads books for a living, so
Right.
I said to him, how'd you manage all those sex scenes? And he said they had like a beat. I didn't have a problem with them. I'm like, okay, good, because I expected to hear complaints about this, but. It's 40 years in two grown-ups' lives. They're going to have sex. I mean, and sex is going to be part of the meaning of their lives and who they are. So it's not really, it seemed to me, never escapable. But, some may say it's too much.
And that narrator is Gibson Fraser, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, if you've listened to any of their books narrated by Gibson Fraser, this should fall right in line with your expectations there. I love to, I get a lot of books, pre-release arcs from publishers, and there are a lot of books that then come out in audio, on pub day, and I'll go listen to the audio as well, just because I want to get a different experience with the book, and I can't wait till this is released.
So Gibson Fraser's.
I do know his work. I do.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I've never listened to an audiobook, except I have a 12-year-old son now by second marriage, but I had three sons earlier, and there was a series called Red Wall with this Northern English guy with a terror accent. He's reading. He did his own, and we used to listen to this in the car. They were great. I mean, it was really great. I love that. But that's the only audiobooks I've ever heard, was the Red Wall series.
Oh, well, you definitely need to read or to listen to Crazy Sorrow when it comes out.
Oh, I'm
sure.
going to.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Vince,
can take it. I mean, maybe I can, maybe I can get sick. Maybe I'll be hiding under the bed shaking. I don't know.
right. Well, there may be some scenes that you'll want to fast forward through, but that's um, Crazy Sorrow available everywhere now. When you're hearing this, go grab it today. Links to it are in the show notes, or go visit your local bookstore and grab it there. Vince, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they connect with you online?
Oh, I have a website now. By God. It's called vincepassaro.com, and I can be reached via the contact page there. There's some other of my work you can link to, and there's links for the book. I'm signing copies on Friday for sale online. Not online exactly. There's a beautiful independent bookstore in New York called 3 Lives and Company, and they're going to be selling signed copies of the book. If you look
Fantastic.
up their website, the information about how to contact them to get one is there, 3lives.com. And there are other links on the web. So vincepassaro.com is how to find me.
Excellent. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Vince, this has been so much fun chatting. We're sending everyone to pick up their copy of Crazy Sorrow today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
You've been great. Thanks so much.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
He led Jason to a small bistro. The door set tiny bells to chime as they entered. The place shivered with smells. Coffee, hot chocolate, and croissants. "This," he said, extending his arm towards a woman in an apron, "is Jennifer. She makes the best scones and is tragically spoken for." He kissed the woman's hand. She was plump, in her 50s. She had left one curler to dangle at the back of her head this morning. "If it's a tragedy to you, this is the first I've heard of it." She swatted at him with a menu. "Why didn't you speak up 20 years ago, lady killer?" Jason sat. Jennifer put a glass of water in front of him. "And who is this fine gentleman?" "This," said Hedwig, joining, "is my son's great-grandfather's great-great-nephew." "That's a lot of greats. Any great-great-great-whatever of Hedwig is great by me." She giggled at her own wit. "I'll be back for your orders." Hedwig swatted her rear end with a menu as she left. He made small talk about the bistro, the specials, what was good, the Benedict, or not so, the hanger steak. When their orders came, coffee for both, eggs for Jason, a scone for himself, he got down to business. "I met your grandmother about, a year ago. Valerie and I have a mutual interest in old families, particularly old families related to the legend for obvious reasons. Valerie's lived in Tarrytown for years, though her family's up near Boston. Now don't worry, I don't believe all that nonsense about a headless horseman. Valerie's the superstitious one, but the Van Brunts are definitely the family in Irving's story. Hermanus Van Brunt and his wife Agatha were farmers in the village back in 1780 or so. This was during the Revolution. Hermanus grabbed title to lands left by a Tory family who'd been tarred and feathered and shipped back to Britain. Do you know your history? Sure, Tory, loyal to the king. Benjamin Franklin broke with his own son who was a Tory. Smart boy. Traitors to the cause, and that was serious business. The British marched straight through here during the war, chased George Washington off Manhattan and out to New Jersey. And after they were kicked out again, a lot of Tories were kicked out with them. Anyway, the Van Brunts took over some farmland north of Tarrytown. They had a son, Abraham. And, of course, their son Abraham married a wealthy heiress. Katrina Van Tassel. Yes, all that is true. It's public record, just like the legend says. My mother left behind quite a few documents written by Abraham Van Brunt, Brom, in Dutch mostly. He was powerful around here. With Katrina's money, he became the biggest stone merchant in the state. He died in 1850. After him, it's Dylan Van Brunt, his son, Joseph, the grandson, then Cornelius, then... Sorry, genealogy is not my thing. No? Why was Eliza doing research on the Van Brunts? She wasn't. She was looking into the Cranes. That's what made us such fast friends. I don't get it, We do go back a ways, your family and mine. More coffee? Jennifer appeared at Jason's elbow. Hedwig nodded, and she poured. Still not getting it, said Jason. But he did. Hedwig turned to the waitress, and Jason knew what he would say. My lady, may I present? He raised his coffee cup, proclaiming, the last descendant of Ichabod Crane.